This is again from the paper I was reading out before the video. This is by Christopher Dawson, Inquiries into Religion and Culture. And it's on a paper, this was article put out by the Frankfurt School, Conspiracy to Corrupt, by Timothy Matthews, but this is so relevant today. Western civilization at the present day is passing through a crisis which is essentially different from anything that has been previously experienced. Other societies in the past have changed their social institutions or their religious beliefs under the influence of external forces or the slow development of internal growth. But none, like our own, has ever consciously faced the prospect of a fundamental alteration of the beliefs and institutions on which the whole fabric of social life rests. Civilization is being uprooted from its foundations in nature and tradition, and is being reconstituted in a new organization which is as artificial and mechanical as a modern factory. So it's being done from the inside. I want to just mention here another video I'd like you to look up on Google Video, which is Common Purpose, Brian Gerrish. That's nice and easy to remember. We'll put the words up for you. Common Purpose, Brian Gerrish, and then you get a whole new field to study on there as well. Fifth column, working from the inside out, and that too is following Fabian agenda. This is huge, isn't it?
It's huge, yeah. This is an important book, Fern. This is an old book, actually. It's by Lord Hewer of Bury. I think he was a Lord Chief Justice in the 20s. I think this was. Let's see the date. And it's called The New Despotism.
That's lovely, 5 shillings.
Yeah, it was 5 shillings. Yeah.
That's lovely.
It was published in 1929. Now, yes. What Lord Hewer was talking about, he was talking about the way that, with the new statutes and so forth that were coming in, very often it would be the minister that would decide on a particular decision. And actually, it wasn't really the minister; it was just somebody in the civil service.
Yes.
But what the Fabians did, they were instrumental in getting the Parliament Act passed in 1911, and this is it's under the Asquith government, which was actually a liberal government.
Yes.
But there's always been lots of Fabians in the Liberal Party.
Yes.
And today the Liberal Democrats. But anyway,
nice.
they're in all parties, not just in Labour. I'm sure there's even some conservative ones. But anyway, Lord Hewer of Bury, he realised that, that by using statute law to put all these this authoritarianism into place,
yes.
This was a challenge to our rule of law, actually, and he wrote this book about it. But he was aware of that back in 1929, and that's a very important book to read and to understand how they've actually put all their rules and regulations into place,
yes.
and how they've tried to dismantle our constitution. And because they had the first attack on the House of Lords then, and they've attacked it regularly since then. I've got a Fabian paper actually about the monarchy, and I looked for it before I came here today and I couldn't find it, but they're always thinking of any way that they can attack the institution of the monarchy in this country.
Yes.
We've got a constitutional monarch now. They did this Fabian paper. I think it must have been about 10 or 15 years ago. One of the gentlemen that's involved in it is Professor Stephen Hassler, who's a very well-known opponent of the monarchy in this country. But I looked through this paper that they'd published, and nowhere in that paper was there anything about the Queen's constitutional position or the coronation oath, where she promises to protect our laws and customs. Now the Fabian Society and Professor Hassler, he completely forgets. He doesn't forget it. He knows very well what it is. He just chooses to ignore that, and then they just keep attacking the monarchy. You know. Take away the royal train, take away the royal yacht.
Yeah.
It's got to have an elected monarch and all this. It goes on and on and on. The Fabian Society has been attacking the monarchy ever since their inception. I'll tell you another fascinating thing. Back into the time of Shaw, though. Have you ever heard about the coefficients? We were talking about the Frankfurt Society. What actually is the Frankfurt Society, and how do you think it affects people in their daily life?
Well,
Frankfurt School,
the
rather,
Frankfurt
not just
School,
Frankfurt School. Yeah, how does it affect people in their daily life? The activities of the Frankfurt School.
I suspect most of you out there think the Frankfurt School is just a school with a playground. The headmistress and school teachers. It's not. It's of course we're talking about the Fabians. I don't want to go too far into this. You can look it up. And the Frankfurt School, if you remember what I read out at the beginning of the video, the little list, that is their agenda. And it's virtually word for word the same as the Fabian agenda and, well, some of the other organisations too, isn't it, where they tie up. But the main thing about the Frankfurt School is they're coming at it from the psychopolitics angle. They're doing the psycho stuff.
Frankfurt School fun.
Yes.
In Western Europe, there were various people that realised that communism couldn't actually be achieved in Britain and the Western European countries in the same way that it had been achieved in Russia. So a group of students at the Frankfurt University got together and they decided to work on ways where they could get communism into Western Europe, and the way that they were going to do it, well, which effectively was to break down the established society. And they were doing it with in psychological means, neuro-linguistic programming, stuff like that. And it's about the promotion of communism, which is the same as the Fabian Society. Same aim. Talking about how it affects us in our daily lives. It does has an extreme effect on our daily lives. Everybody knows about political correctness. Everyone makes jokes about it. But at the same time as that, many people are afraid of it. For example, you'll get your own child come back from school, and he or she will say something that's obviously very, very tainted by political correctness. Mm-hmm. We get it all the time. We get it you even get it promoted by the police and everything. So, but what actually is it? It's to get you thinking. It's to stop you from thinking freely, and it's a way of putting your mind in a cage, so you can't think freely, and you can't oppose the imposition of communism, or you're less able to do so. It's mind control. That's what it is. Yeah.
It's almost as if they're taking away words out of the language we can't say anymore. And when you take a word out of the language, you haven't got a way of describing it, of talking about it to people, so you don't. And it just kind of erodes away, doesn't it?
Well, yeah. I mean, it is also another aspect of this is the manipulation of history.
Yeah.
For example, Norman Dodds Norman Dodds talks about where they were trying to, people like the Carnegie Endowment and the Rockefeller, they were trying to change the American school books regarding the American history and the American Constitution and so forth. So they actually got a whole raft of young people, young professors and so forth, and they actually sent them over to London to be re-educated, so that they could be the new generation of writers of history. But they would write it in a slanted way. So this is about manipulation of manipulation of people. If you don't know your history, you're under a very, very severe disadvantage, because you can't talk about your natural rights and so forth if you don't know your history, and if it's been messed around with, you're very severely disadvantaged, aren't you?
This was actually one of the books that Robert's brought. You've seen this one already, but I want to go back onto this one, because this was actually from 1942. You can see sixpence on there. Regional government. So this is not a new idea brought about by Prescott's Office of Deputy Prime Minister at all. And it's not a new idea brought about by the European Union. So exactly what is it? And why have we got this regional government in 1942?
Well, it's if you want to drastically change anything, one of the ways of doing it is divide and conquer. So during the wartime, the Fabians occupied they had some important positions in the British government. They decided that they would let Churchill and the Conservatives get on with running the war. They wouldn't interfere, but they were going to get ready for the socialist government in 1945. This is part of their preparation, where this is long-term stuff. This is long-term planning, and they're very, very good at that. Let's give them their credit. They're very, very clever at working on long-term plans. This is what it's all about. Slowly does it, and the regionalism has been promoted all over the world. I'm sure you know in the United States you've got how many regions is it? Was it 6? I can't remember. But it's been regional. Yes. They were talking about cutting the United States up into regions right back in the 30s,
and crossing state borders.
Yeah, and it comes from the Fabians and their associates in the United States. Yeah. Obviously, we tend to think that it's the European Union that's regionalised everything.
Right. Yeah.
But actually, these are the roots, and of course, the European Union has got Fabian roots as well. It goes back a long, long time. Now, what's very interesting about regional government, as promoted by the Fabian Society, it comes in. John Christian talks about it in his Communist Councils in New Zealand. I know that this paper is, to a very large extent, accurate, and I know that because I've given it to some important people, and they've acknowledged to me that it's very reliable to give you an idea of how things are going in the world today.
Right.
I mean, Colonel Barry Turner did the notes in amplification of it.
Yeah.
You can actually see Barry Turner's notes in amplification on the Australian League of Rights website. Now, the Fabian Society had a 5-year plan that was promoted.
Doesn't that tie up with Gordon Brown, 5-year plan?
Yeah, well, it's a communist thing. All these 5-year plans and 10-year plans.
Yes. We're hearing that all the time from
That's
Gordon
right.
Brown.
That's right. And it tells you here, the British Fabian Society planned to take over the world by the City of London financial community, was first published in a book called All These Things. All These Things, by a New Zealand author and journalist, A.N. Field. The book was first published in 1936 by Omni Publications in the United States, and it was censored in New Zealand. The document, called Freedom and Planning, was secretly circulated in 1932 by the inner councils of the members of the Political Economic Plan, otherwise known as PEP in London. That's a Fabian organisation. PEP, Political and Economic Plan. The then chairman of the organisation was a City of London Jew, Israel Moses Seif, who was the reputed author of the plan. The headquarters of PEP were at 16 Queen Anne's Gate, London. Mr. Seif was also chairman and financier of Marks and Spencer's chain stores, and he was vice president of the British Zionist Society. Centred around the City of London Jewellery's international financiers in the Bank of England subsidiary, called the Bankers Industrial Development Company, the essence of the document, Freedom and Planning, was, and still is, to gradually Sovietise the world based on their 5-year plan, inaugurated in Moscow in 1927-28 in the Soviet Union. Basically, the plan involved the subtle transfer of the entire productive capacity of each country throughout the world into a series of great state-owned departments, which would then be corporatised, then privatised, a City of London corporation, international banks and corporations which they control. Individual property ownership would be severely restricted, with most of the land sea, fisheries, rivers, lakes, ports, railways, communications, media, roads, electricity, energy, food, water, waste management, housing, farms, commercial property, schools, hospitals, police, social welfare, inland revenue, etc., transferred into statutory corporations.
That sounds like the Sustainable Development
It
Service.
does, doesn't it?
Yes.
Companies or land trusts, which indirectly would be owned by City of London banks. The peasants, they would still be allowed to own their own clothes and small assets like furniture, cars and boats.
Toys.
But the main assets of each country would be owned by their multinational corporations and banks.
Wow.
In essence, the City of London Corporation would become the One World Earth Corporation and would privately own the world. Similar to the experiment carried out in the USSR, the whole world would eventually be transferred into a communist United Nations World Soviet Socialist Republic, where each country would be regionalised and ruled through regional councils, through a United Nations dictatorship called a Parliamentary Assembly, which would just be another name for a Soviet Central Committee, and all independent, sovereign national governments would be totally abolished. So you see that ties in, Fern, with this regional government.
It does, doesn't it?
promotion,
Yes.
You see.
Yes. 1942.
1942. They were
1942.
talking about that, yeah. Yeah, that's right.
Yes.
Talking about abolishing national sovereignty, there's quite an important one here. This is a quotation from Arnold Toynbee. Arnold Toynbee was a Fabian, and he was co-originator of the Royal Institute of International Affairs.
Ah.
But that's Chatham House. So, right.
That's another side road, isn't it? That ties up with
Well,
Tavistock and Frankfurt School.
Well, he tells you straight here. He went to a meeting in Copenhagen in 1931.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not concealed. They're quite open about it. Mm-hmm. If this is what Toynbee says, if we are frank with ourselves, we shall admit that we are engaged on a deliberate and sustained and concentrated effort to impose limitations upon the sovereignty and independence of the 50 or 60 local independent states which at present partition the habitable surface of the earth and divide the political allegiance of mankind. So that's Toynbee speaking, Royal Institute of International Affairs. That just reminded me of another thing.
Yes.
Now, the Royal Institute of International Affairs was started 1919, I think, just after the First World War. Now, I was checking up a gentleman called Sir Henry Martin. He was the Vice-Chancellor of Eton College,
Yes.
which is just across the River Thames, from Windsor Castle. Now, Sir Henry Martin, he was actually the Queen Elizabeth and Queen Margaret's tutor
Oh, really?
on the history
Yes.
and constitution of this country. Now, I've done a little bit of digging around on Sir Henry Martin, and I don't know that he was a Fabian. I can't even say that he was or not, but I've got no proof of that. But I do know that he was a member of the Royal Institute of International Affairs from at least 1921. And right up until his death. And I also do know that there's a considerable overlap between the membership of Chatham House, which is Royal Institute of International Affairs, and the Fabian Society. There's quite an overlap there.
Right.
So there's a good. So you can guarantee that Martin would have known Toynbee, and Martin was the man that taught our Queen the Constitution and the history. Now, lots of people, lots of campaigners concerned about our Queen. They say, well, she made the promise in 1952 to safeguard our laws and customs, and plainly she hasn't done it, because she's signed all the European Union treaties.
Yes.
Not once has she ever put her foot down, as far as I'm concerned.
Right.
So you could say, well, she was taught by Henry Martin, is this Royal Institute man.
Yes.
And he would have been in the Royal Institute. He would have been rubbing shoulders with all these people, such as Toynbee and Fabians, and people that have been deliberately involved in breaking down the national sovereignties of the different countries.
Yeah.
So
Just a little aside there before I ask my question of Robert. For the American viewers out there, I just want to point out the Royal Institute for International Affairs is a sister organisation of the Council on Foreign Relations. So look them up. It's the same kind of agenda. So anyway, yeah, Robert, I was going to say about the Queen here. It's very, very hard for us Brits, isn't it, to take in that the Queen is anything but benevolent to a country. She's such a wonderful, respected lady here.
Well, she's meant to be our final safeguard of our freedoms and customs and our laws, isn't she? So, the problem is she uttered this oath at her coronation. She uttered an oath and she promised to safeguard our laws and customs. That's in her coronation oath. It's part of our constitution. But she hasn't done it because she's handed over so much power to the EU. But they do it in a very crafty way. They say, "Oh no, the British Parliament still has the final say," and it's true. Actually, we can repeal the Treaty of Rome in 24 hours. It's true, but I think many British people are very disappointed that the Queen doesn't actually exercise her power, or she doesn't seem to be executing her power or obligation to safeguard our laws and customs. She doesn't seem to have done that at all.
It has been done, hasn't it? Quite recently. I think Queen Anne did, and one of the Georges quite recently refused to sign an act. It was a bit of a constitutional crisis, but it can be done.
It can be done, yeah. But the Fabians deny that. They always deny. That's part of their thing. They say that the monarch never sends back a bill and never refuses to sign a bill. But that's not true because several monarchs have done it. Yeah. And I think it was King Edward in the early 20th century. I think he sent one back.
Oh right,
yeah, but it has been done. But the Fabians put it about that it's never been done. You see, but they need to actually take down our monarchy to fully put their agenda into practice, and they've been chipping away at it for a long time.
It's becoming really obvious now. As I said, they're trying to break down all our traditions and all our establishments, established institutions that make us who we are, and they're turning the law system. We don't respect that anymore. We don't respect the police anymore. Even the good old fire service, our lovely old firemen, the British Bobby, and all the way they're knocking on about the Queen and the royal family, and when that goes, and now it's Parliament. We all know right now, this minute, they're absolutely attacking the MPs.
They are.
I mean, okay, they've done something wrong, it's come to light, but nonetheless, it's just pulling away from the inside everything that makes us who we are. And in a way, the Queen is the last bastion of our sovereignty, isn't she?
Well, she actually, the way that our constitution is worked out, yes, the Queen is the guardian of our liberty. Yeah. Also, obviously, the Queen wrote on the Bible. Now, the thing is, you see, that the Fabians and the communists, they abhor the idea of God because they can't actually put their plan into place when there's God there, it's Him that's provided you your freedoms.
Yes.
But they want to turn that on its head. Everything that you've got, as George Bernard Shaw says, we will provide you with everything. We'll give you a house, a job, clothes. But if you don't actually prove yourself worthy of all these things we're going to give you, we might give you the friendly gas or something, I think he called it, just knock you off, But because they want to usurp the power of, they want to usurp God, and that is really the thing that's motivated me probably more than anything else, Fern.
Well, they're attacking the Christian churches.
I can't bear the idea that these people set themselves up as the ultimate authority. I cannot bear it, and that's why I thought it'd be a good thing to come over here today and talk about it.
That's brilliant.
Yeah.
We've got so many people in this country who know a lot of things like this, but what we're trying to do is connect all the dots for you and give you a big picture. You know, Robert's got so much knowledge at his fingertips, and more books. What have we got here?
Well, we've got some other. This is a big one. This is a big important book. This is by Rose L. Martin, Fabian Freeway. It's published in America, in Chicago, 1966. That gives you so much information about the start of the Fabian Society. Right, well, obviously, right up to 1966. Incidentally, the person that's mentioned in there is Edith Summerskill.
Oh.
Now, Edith Summerskill.
Yes.
So let's bring this right up to date.
Yeah.
Edith Summerskill is the grandmother of Ben Summerskill, who's the main light in Stonewall, the lesbian, gay, bisexual, and was it transsexual group that pushes for promotion of their rights.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yes.
Now,
so they have Fabian connections.
Oh, yeah,
too.
yeah. His grandmother was Baroness Summerskill, and she was a stalwart of the Fabian Society. And isn't it interesting that Ben Summerskill has now been co-opted onto the Fabian executive?
Oh, really?
He's on it. But the other interesting thing is that there are various there's certain groups, and there's one group that I was checking up the other day called Gay Mafia Watch. And these are a group of homosexuals and lesbians and bisexuals and transsexuals. They're a group of group of such people who said, hang on a minute, we're fed up with being manipulated by the likes of Summerskill, Ben Summerskill, and his organisation, Stonewall. He said, in other words, Summerskill they with their crafty political manoeuvrings, they've tried to use those people, those homosexual people, gay people, and so forth. They've tried to use them, and some of them have cottoned onto it. They've twigged it, and now they're saying no. We've had enough. So they're being used for political purposes.
Yes.
And of course, this Gay Mafia Watch, they go into the meaning of the word Stonewall, and it turns out that Stonewall wasn't this club in New York where there was a riot in the 60s. It was the nickname of a man called Claiborne, who was in the American Civil War. He was actually you think he was a homosexual himself, but he wanted to use the freed black prisoners on behalf of the British forces, you see. But anyway, you can read it, you can check it out if you want. Anyway, I haven't gone into that stuff about Claiborne actually myself, but I know that those people are being manipulated, and some of them are getting fed up with it.
Yes,
and Stonewall is a Fabian front.
Right.
Yeah.
They've got fingers in all the pies,
haven't
they?
They're up to everything.
So many fronts.
They're up to everything. They're up to all the modern communications. They're on They're up to Twitter and Facebook and all the stuff all the modern stuff.
Yes.
They're right bang up to the minute. And but they're still pushing the same old agenda.
And Gordon Brown.
Yeah, well, because he is, yeah. Of course, Brown is
Big Fabian,
big Fabian,
yeah.
Incidentally, when the Attlee government got in after Churchill was kicked out in 1945, they made a complete mess of everything. We had food rationing for, I forget, 4, 5, 6 years after the war finished.
Yes.
You could only have 1.5 eggs a week, even 4 or 5 years after the war finished. They had identity cards, rationing for everything. There was goodness knows how many government organisations that could just come into your house with no permission, and it was coming on for a Soviet state. You know, that was the Fabian government, and they actually propped that up with money from the United States. And then at a certain point, and Harry Dexter White was involved in that. Harry Dexter White, the American, and who was later found out to be a Soviet spy. They were milking the United States to prop up the Fabian government. And then when the Americans twigged it, and they stopped it, then they had to put the tax up. They just couldn't pay for all all these projects that they've been having, you see, and they didn't last much longer after that. But they're economically, of course, they're a washout. In actual fact, that's quite. If you go on to Lyndon LaRouche's website, now we don't agree with everything Lyndon LaRouche says, but he's extremely well informed on many things, and he's done an awful lot of research. He's a learned man, although he's got very, very distinct opinions on things.
Yes.
He says here, Fabianism is among the principal expressions of that systemic moral corruption which has been employed as a weapon of psychological warfare to render nations and their peoples increasingly stupefied morally as much as intellectually, and also less and less productive per capita and per square kilometre. I always found something a bit incongruous with Mr. LaRouche, because I could never quite understand how he's enthusiastic for Franklin D. Roosevelt and his government, what he did and so forth, and yet Franklin D. Roosevelt had Fabians all around him in his government.
He did.
He did. Yes,
Even
he did.
then,
He
yeah.
did. Yeah. And I could never quite figure that out. And I wrote I sent a message to Mr. LaRouche and asked him that question. You know, why is it that you promote Franklin D. Roosevelt so much? You know,
Yeah.
when he obviously had some Fabian, he had Fabian people round him, advising him and so forth, like Frankfurt, like Judge Frankfurter, you know, people like him.
Mm-hmm.
And he wrote back and he said to me, well, he said the reason, he said, but Franklin D. Roosevelt always did everything strictly to the American Constitution, so therefore that was all right as far as he was concerned. But I was always a bit worried about it. It seemed to not quite fit in for me. Yeah. And I'm still not quite sure now, but anyway, I keep reading things and trying to learn more, you know.
That's the secret, really, isn't it? You just got to read everything, and don't close your mind if you don't like half of what they're saying. It doesn't mean to say the other half isn't right, you know. Just the whole thing is don't take anyone's word for it. Look it up yourself, because it's the information's all there out there, isn't it?
Yeah. The other thing we never spoke about, of course, was the Hegelian dialectic.
Yes.
George Bernard Shaw and Sidney Webb, they pioneered the use of that, which is in debate, which is where you put forward a thesis, then there's a reaction to it, and out of that reaction comes the synthesis.
Oh, that's problem, reaction, solution.
Yeah, that's
of
right. Yeah,
David
yeah.
Icke.
That's
Yeah,
right. Yeah.
You're probably really good.
So Bernard Shaw and Sidney Webb, they pioneered that, and of course you can imagine a man, such an accomplished man as George Bernard Shaw.
Yes.
You can imagine him in a debating situation, can't you?
Yes.
He such a command of the language, so witty, so clever. Of course, obviously he could steer the debate pretty well, I would imagine.
Isn't that something, the Delphi technique?
Yeah,
they call that.
Yeah, Delphi technique. Yeah, that's right.
Problem, reaction, solution. I've got a pretty. If you want to know what that is, on a sort of a small, this is kind of a small scale. If you were to go into a town and say, we're going to put cameras on every corner, this is a nice town, say in the 50s, times when you used to leave your door open when you went shopping, you know, let your toddler wander out and play up the street, yeah? So you walk into this town and you say, right, we're going to put cameras on every corner. We're going to follow all your trips in your cars so we know everything you're doing. There'd be, well,
hullabaloo, yeah.
Pay, yes, complete hullabaloo. They wouldn't allow it. No. So they know they want the cameras up. How are they going to fix it? So they cause a problem. And that problem is caused, we stop punishing children for vandalism. We stop punishing children for mugging, looting. We have drunks all over the street. People become afraid to walk through their town centre. Then they come up with an idea. Tell you what, let's put some cameras up in the city centre and we'll film everything that's going on and we'll protect you.
More control.
Yeah, you'll feel great because you'll feel safe then, and we can see. And everyone will say, yes, please. And now they're asking, please, will you put cameras up? Job done. Problem, reaction of the people, and their solution pops in. And that's kind of a small scale. This is an enormous big scale operation too. It goes from the smallest decisions right up to the big ones.
The war is a classic Hegelian situation, isn't it?
Yeah.
You scare everybody with the war on terror. Then there's got to be a reaction and a synthesis, which is more and more control and more loss of freedom.
Yes.
And the interesting thing is, that I was reading the other day that the BBC said that they admitted that there was no such thing as Al Qaeda anyway.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Yeah. But nothing's going to be done about it, we know. Anyway, we're not really diversing away from Bernard Shaw and the Fabians, because they're at the root of all this stuff, aren't they? They've got their fingers into every little part of this. You know, you go digging back far enough, and there they are.
They've got 6,000 members in UK approximately.
Yeah.
Which, of course, is a tiny amount, and out of those 6,000, it'll only be a tiny inner core that are manipulating things.
Yes,
The inner core,
yes.
You see. So really, they're a tiny handful of people that have had enormous effect. And the clever thing, one of the clever things they do, they always keep a low profile. That way, they don't get into any sort of big public controversy and so forth. They're always under people's radar, but at the same time as that, they're working. We didn't mention the classic way that they work, which was set up, which is permeation and infiltration. Permeation and infiltration. Now, incidentally, infiltration, that would have been carried out by the Fabian women before women had a big part in politics and so forth. They would be talking to influential people in the drawing rooms and influencing them and all this.
Yes,
you know.
yes.
Infiltration, getting into every type of organisation and influencing it from within. It doesn't matter what it is, Conservative Party.
That would be women's organisations, feminist
anything you like, Women's Institute,
family planning stuff,
anything. The other thing is permeation is also today is known as consensus. It's the same thing. So whenever you see the word consensus, we're seeking a consensus on this. That's the Fabian way. Got to get a consensus, because you can always get a consensus on something. I mean, if I'm your utter enemy, and I can't stand you or anything to do with you, there's always some little thing where I can make common cause with you.
Yes.
Something, you know.
Yes.
Even if we say, well, the road that runs from your country to mine, yes, we've got to have a joint committee to look after it. Yeah, all right. We'll make common cause on that. So they always find some little thing to make common cause on. Obviously, the environment is a big thing.
Oh yes.
So that's a perfect thing for them to do it. You see.
Yeah, and that's pulled a lot of other groups in together, all working with them, hasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely.
This is something I'd like you to see now. The inside cover of this book, the Fabian window. And we have to remember for a minute, Gordon Brown recently coming out, and he's talking about the New World Order. It's a sort of a buzzword these days. Well, here it is. The New World Order. So I'm just going to ask Robert to tell us quickly what this one's about, and then he's going to sum up for us what we've been talking about today, and I hope we can send you off with some really good information to go and investigate for yourselves. Thank you, Robert.
This is written by Dennis Cuddy, PhD. He was in the United States Education Service for many years. He knows the way that education was managed and manipulated in the United States, going right back to the time of John Dewey. In that booklet, he gives you a history of socialism. But he goes back much before that. He goes back to French Revolution, and he goes back to Saint Simon, who was an important figure in the 19th century, and takes it really from an American angle, which is important obviously it's important because he is an American, but it's a jolly interesting and very informative book, that one. And Dennis Cuddy, he goes on to Radio Liberty in California very frequently. That's www.radioliberty.com, and he's frequently being interviewed on Radio Liberty with Dr. Stan. He's on the American website as well, News with Views. I expect you've seen that one, Fern, haven't you? News with Views.
Yeah, we can get all these, go on the internet for the radio station too, can't we?
Yeah. He's a very knowledgeable man, Dennis Cuddy.
Yeah.
So it's important to read some of the things that he puts up.
Right.
I think that I think it's appalling actually that a tiny group of people who know how to manipulate the masses have had so much influence over the last 100 years or so. I find it unbearable that they should have been up to all these pranks for all this time, but pranks that have changed everyone's life. And I do think the only way we can try to change things is to educate them, because Fabians always went in for what they called education. It comes into their literature so much education, but what they consider to be education and research is their other word. But you can guarantee whenever you see Fabian education and Fabian research, it's always twisted to fit in with their aims. And what we can do is to learn about what they've been up to, and be very, very conscious of it, and tell other people about it, because they've had it their own way for too long.
You're right.
Yeah.
We've got to fight back. We have got to fight back. There's millions of us, and there's only a few of them. So go back to the list that I read you out at the beginning. The Fabian agenda on the go now as we speak. The creation of racism offences, continual change to create confusion, the teaching of sex and homosexuality to children, the undermining of schools and teachers' authority, huge immigration to destroy identity,